Alright, well, welcome to another problem-solving exercise. I'm going to start off with a confession. When I pulled up this particular problem, I immediately considered skipping it because I didn't really want to show how ignorant I am in these Sicilian style positions. I've never been a mainline Sicilian player. It's a defect in my chess understanding, and I really fear that it's going to be extremely apparent in this position. So this one might be a little bit of a Patzer's introduction to not understanding the Sicilian. Okay, but this is a good opportunity for me to learn a little bit more about these type of structures, and for maybe you to learn a little as well from the authors, not from me. In this position, we're asked if white is better, worse, or equal, and we're asked what white's best move is in this position. So I'm inclined to think that white should be better here. On the one hand, these structures can be good for black in the right case. There's the very famous game of Anons where he showed the power of the two bishops and the doubled pawns. I don't remember who he was playing black against. It's I think a game from '95. And there have been other games as well. But in this particular case, uh, it feels like white has a real clamp on the position. And his pressure on e6 seems to me to be very strong. Black can't relieve it by pushing e5, as he may often do, because white's got great control of the d5 square and would have a real bind on the position. So, to my mind, white should be better with this strong pressure on e6. There are potentially a lot of sacrifices that could emerge from this. Other brief tactical points include that black is threatening to take on g2. I don't know if he could get away with it or not, but at least the move is there for consideration. The big thing that I'm thinking about in this position is that maybe this is one of the positions in which it's possible to sacrifice a piece on d5 in the hopes of opening the e-file and bringing in pressure against that king and that bishop. If white had a rook on e1 in this position, I would think that it might very well be possible to sacrifice a piece on d5 so that the e-file could be opened, and with the doubling of the queen and the rook, the threatened mate on e7 might be very strong. On the other hand, it might not. I could just be wrong there. But this seems like an important idea, this control over d5. I'm thinking, too, that there might immediately be an idea to play knight to d5, and I'm realizing that's not correct because I was thinking that pawn captures, queen captures, sets up the queen and the bishop on f7, but there's the queen defending d5, so we would just trade queens as black. So, in this position, I guess the first thing is, does knight d5 mean anything? And I would think that it shouldn't, because white's not got anything on the e-file yet, and the king is going to be able to slide over to f8 here, I think. And he can bring another rook to defend e7, so I can't imagine that knight d5 immediately would be good. Perhaps, though, it's possible to consider capturing on e6 immediately first, and then introducing some of these ideas. After the capture on e6, it's imperative that the f-pawn recaptures, simply because after captures, bishop captures, white's or black's pawn structure is just devastated, and although black may not be lost yet, he will always be much, much worse with that devastated pawn structure. So after captures, you have to try this if you want to have a tenable game as black. But on the other hand, black's position is just becoming more open in this position. It may be possible to sacrifice on e6, although I don't see a breakthrough right away. Maybe possible to play knight d5. Maybe it's even possible to play pawn to e5. This is looking tempting to me. I'm very tempted by the idea of capturing on e6, and then immediately pushing pawn to e5. There's a couple of ideas here. One is that you cannot capture with the d-pawn because queen will take on d7. Another is that after queen take e5, if nothing else, white could capture on a7, after which he's got his pawn back already, and he's just intending to play rook to e1 when I cannot imagine that black's king could survive. So pawn captures e5 is looking tempting to me. What about the f-pawn capturing? So if the f-pawn captures, I don't see a sacrifice right away, but I have split the board in two in this position. Black's queen is no longer able to come to the defense of the king should I be able to infiltrate over on the king side. I've opened up the king's position further, and I'm thinking that after f take e5, maybe I can just play queen to e4 with potentially a threat to capture on b7, which I'm not really sure I believe in, and a much more concerning threat, I think, of capturing on h7. I may also have other moves, and I would particularly like to get the knight to e4, I think. All of this seems really tempting to me, and I think that this is what I would play. I'm not sure if I'm missing something else, but I don't think it's possible to sacrifice pieces on d5 or to sacrifice on e6. I think that white may be able to get some attack for it, but I don't think he's winning. But after this capture here, the pawn sacrifice e5 really seems to allow white to rip into black's position. I don't think black is ever going to be able to close up the position and really consolidate. I think his king is going to be a long-term weakness. And I think that the open lines that white's rooks and bishop and queen and the e4 square for the knight, all of that just come together, and I would be really, really happy to play white's position on a practical level in this case. Well, I think I'm going to have to consider this a miss, but it is more interesting than a straightforward miss. I did absolutely reveal my ignorance of these types of Sicilian positions here. The move queen e3 is very strong, and white has a big advantage. He's taking advantage of the weakness of e6 and the weakness of h7 by threatening queen h3, and he's taking advantage of how the queen on a5 is really struggling to provide defense to the king side, which is startlingly short of defenders, and good prodding by white is very effective. Queen e3 gives white a clear advantage. The analysis is very good that the authors present. On the other hand, the intended pawn sacrifice that I played is a very interesting pawn sacrifice. The capture on e6 followed by e5 offers white more than enough compensation for the pawn sacrifice, but it's not at all clear that white is significantly better after the pawn sacrifice. He has plenty of compensation. I think most people would choose to play white in that position and would consider white better, and even the computer agrees that the pawn sacrifice is promising, but one shouldn't sacrifice a pawn when there is an effective positional solution like 1 queen e3. And on a slightly more personal note, I'm disappointed to latch on to the pawn sacrifice e5, which is good and interesting, but to miss the effective positional move queen e3 is disappointing. It's the sort of move that wins a lot more games than pawn sacrifices like e5 do, and it's the one that you really would prefer to see here. It's a very effective idea.